Okay, so we've made the argument that you should be trapping names every chance you get, and that every name you trap is worth something to you and someone else. And we talked about the importance of name trapping. So, how much is a name really worth? Well, to cover this topic, we need to understand that your loyal customers is your firm's most valuable asset. And of course, your customers need to be managed like you would manage your brand or your 401k or any other valuable asset that your organization owns. So your database is an asset. Every name you trap is worth something to you and someone else. The question is, how much is it worth? Well, let me show you this with an example. And this is a true story about a former undergraduate and MBA student here at UNLV. His name was Ryan. And Ryan, when he graduated as an undergraduate and got ready to go into the MBA program, he had a friend who was in the blinds business, the window covering business in California. And he's told Ryan, he said, Ryan, what I'll do is I'll make you the exclusive agent for our brand of window coverings in Las Vegas. And so Ryan came to me with that idea, and I said, well, that's probably a good idea, Ryan. I said, how are you going to prospect for new customers? So Ryan and I talked about it a little bit, and then he left. And he came back about 2 weeks later, and he said, so here's what I need. He said, I need a list of all of the people who have purchased a new home in the last month or so. He said, I need a list of people, and the reason for that is when you buy a brand new house, it has no window coverings. And typically the HOA gives you a very limited amount of time, typically a month or 6 weeks, to come up with window coverings. So you can't really put newspapers over the windows or tinfoil over the windows. You might be able to hang sort of sheets over the windows for a short period of time, but fairly quickly you'll need to have window coverings purchased. So the trick, if you're in the window covering business, is to be able to contact those people right after they purchased a house so that you can be first in line to offer them an estimate on the cost of the potential window coverings that they're interested in putting up in your house. Now, he asked me about lists that were out there, and I suggested to him a list that most companies sell. The local database company at the time was a company called Passkey, and I recommended he go to Passkey and look at and evaluate what's called the new mover list. These are people who have moved into a different residence in the last period of time, typically the last 2 or 3 months. So Ryan went and he looked at their list, and of course it had people who were moving into apartments from one apartment to another. It had people on that list who, and some of the people on that list, their names were 2 or 3 months old, and Ryan knew that data was too old. And so after he got done looking at that for a while, he came in and he said to me, that new mover list really isn't worth it because it's too old. He said, what I want are people who have just purchased their house. And it hadn't been all that long ago when I bought my current house. And so we talked about it, and I said to him, well, the county recorder has to record all of the deeds to all of the houses. And I said, and so that data has to be readily available there. I said, and I suspect you can just go down there and they will email you that list. So he went down to the county recorder's office, and he found that they make those because it is public information, that they post those closing of houses and title transfers and deed transfers within 3 days of the closing of the sale of the house. And but unfortunately for him, for Ryan, that data was not available in some sort of electronic or Excel file record form. It was only available on microfiche and microfilm at the county recorder's office. So to be able to get that information, you had to physically go to the county recorder's office and then get that piece of data from the county recorder and look it up using a microfilm or a microfiche reader. And I don't remember which it was, but it was one or the other. So Ryan went down with his laptop computer, and this was around the year around 2000, maybe the early 2000s. So Ryan went down there, and he figured that it would take him about, once he learned how to do this, that he could go up on the microfiche, find the house closing, and then transfer that information over, type it back into his Excel spreadsheet the way that he wanted to type in name, address, all that information. He could type that information in, and he could do about 10 of those an hour. So and he figured that if he were paying himself $10 an hour, then he could get that stuff done for $10 an hour. Of course, he had to go down there and actually do it. Now, at that particular point in time, there were around, I don't remember exactly what the number was, but I want to say that there were a lot of closings every week. This is when the housing boom was sort of at its finest. It was like I said, around the late 1990s and the early 2000s, when home builders were just building houses as fast as they possibly could. Certainly be way before the 2008 crash. All right, so Ryan decided that it wasn't worth it for him to go down and do this, so he hired a couple of senior citizens. And the senior citizens would go down there, and they could spend about 4 hours a day or so. And so if you figure 10 an hour, they would, so if they were doing 10 an hour in 4 hours a day, they could do 40 of these. And so they would have either 1 or 2 people down there doing the transfer of information, and he would pay those guys. And I don't remember exactly what the number was, but it was like $10 an hour cash. So these would be people who were retirees. It didn't screw up their Social Security. It didn't screw up their pensions. And he was paying them cash to go down and do this. So he was getting all these names. And so with the list, Ryan figured that he would get about a 2% response rate for the blinds. That is, because he was going to have this information, he would be able to contact these people with a direct mail piece, and that about 5 to 10% of the people would read the piece and call him, and at the end of the day, he would get a 2% response rate. That is, 2 out of every 100 people he contacted would actually buy blinds from him, with an average sale of about $1,500 and a 40% profit margin, or roughly $600 per sale. And of course, now this didn't, so once he got a couple of sales and he did a great job, he would of course get referrals. And so this did not account for referrals, but you could easily figure out how you would account for referrals in this by simply adding and snowballing that information in. So everybody who bought from him would be worth $600 in profits. and he was figuring a 2% response rate, so he would get 2 out of 100. So for every 100 names he trapped and sent information to, he would net $1,200. Well, so let's make the little calculation here. So the net was $1,500 by 40%, or $600 times 2%, or it turns out that for every name that he trapped, every address that he trapped, he would be able to make $12 on it, minus a $2 mailing expense. And that was a little higher than it really was, but he figured $2 mailing expense, so that every name that he went down to the county recorder's office and trapped, he would be able to make $10 on that name. Well, that doesn't sound like a lot of money, $10 per name trap, but and he still had to do the business part of this of measuring blinds and all that sort of stuff, and selling the blinds, and then having the installers go in and all that sort of stuff. It doesn't sound like a lot of money until you realize that there was between 300 and 400 closings per week back then in Las Vegas. So roughly he would this would be someplace around $3,000 to $4,000 a week in net profits, times 50 weeks a year, or somewhere between $150,000 and $200,000 per year in profits from this blinds business. And all he would really have to do would be to go out and sell the blinds, and then have the set up the installation and those sorts of things. He wouldn't have to go to individual knocking on individual doors, or hanging flyers on door handles, or wherever else he might do, driving around with a car with blinds for sale on the car or whatever. He wouldn't have to do any of that, and he would have a $200,000 a year profits in his business. That's pretty good. That's a pretty good gig. $200,000 a year is a good profit to have running your own business. But Ryan had my undergraduate database marketing class, and in fact, he was in my graduate database marketing class, and he knew he could make more money with a little extra effort. So he knew that, he'd heard the story about name trapping, and the notion for name trapping, and that is every name you trap is worth something to you and potentially worth something to someone else. So he and I sat down one day and did a little bit of brainstorming, and said, who else needs this data? Who else needs to be the first person to contact a brand new homeowner to try to get their business? And of course the answer is, well, window tinting companies, solar screen companies, pool builders, landscapers, pest control companies, and the list goes on and on and on. And so we had about 20 different people who we thought would be interested in this list. Well, the question is, how much were these names worth to these companies? So we sat down and we did a little back of the envelope calculations. And so we said, okay, let's look at window tinting as an example. So if a window tinting company has 4,000 names, that would be sort of 10 weeks worth of names. And the response rate, that is, they sold one to every one, they got one sale out of every 100 customers that they had mailed to. Their response rate would be 1%, 40 responses out of 4,000 customers, and each of those customers would be worth, and the total value then would be, we figured would be $1,000 per sale, or $10 for each name that was purchased. Same thing for pest control companies. It was costing them $1. It was costing them, so pest control companies and pool builders, we figured it would only be 1 out of every 1,000 people who you contacted as a pool builder. So we had rough estimates, and so the value of the names was around $10 to each of them, the same as it was for Ryan, by the way. So the question became, well, how much should you charge per name? They're worth $10. How much should we charge? Well, he set the price at $1 a name and quickly found 12 clients. So now he had 12 clients, and so every time he trapped a name, he would get $12 for that name from his various clients, minus the $1 cost of him capturing that name. So he was getting then $11 times 400 names per week, or $4,400 per week times 50 weeks a year. That is $220,000 a year by simply trapping these names. Well, this immediately got Ryan to thinking that maybe he shouldn't be in the vertical blinds business. Maybe he should just be in the name trapping business. Now, remember, he wasn't really doing any of this work. All of the hard work, all the labor was being done by a series of retirees who he had set up with laptops, and they would go down every day and trap this information for him. Well, one person led to another person, led to another person, and after 6 months, the demand for his list had increased. So he raised the price to $1.50 per name and ended up with 30 clients. So that's 30 clients times $1.50, or $45 in profits for each name, minus the dollar it cost for him to trap the information. That is, he was then making $17,600 per week with 400 names. Times 50 weeks a year was $880,000 a year with simply by simply having someone else do a bunch of legwork for him every day. His biggest job was maintaining his client list. And he was making then almost $1 million a year. So so at the end of the day, Ryan found out that it was worth more for him to trap names than it was for him to sell vertical blinds. So how much is a name worth? Well, it depends. But this is a good example of someone creating a business out of this. Now, there is a little end to that story, and the end of that story goes something like this. Um, there was somebody else who was working in that office and saw his people collecting that information. And so they decided that they would do the same thing. And Ryan's comment was, that's okay. They're not that, that's not that much competition for him. But at the end of the day, they eventually put all of that data in a system so that you could simply go up online and with a little bridge program download that information. So then Ryan's business was really automated even more. But then, of course, we had the 2008-2009 situation, and so I haven't talked to Ryan for a couple of years, so I don't know exactly how things are going for him now. All right, so that's one example of how much a name is worth. Here's another example of how much a name is worth. Now, as you watch this part of the video, I recommend that you get out a paper and pencil and a calculator and run these numbers yourself as we're going through this. So the task was to launch the Oldsmobile 98, which is the giant luxury brand for Oldsmobile in 1991. Now, you're familiar with Oldsmobile. Some of you are familiar with Oldsmobile. Some of you have never heard of the Oldsmobile brand of car. It was a General Motors brand, and they went out of business in the early 2000s. But it turns out that in the middle 1980s, they had the #1 selling model of car in the country. They had a car called the Oldsmobile Cutlass, and it had something called Colonnade Brougham styling, and they were selling that car. That car became the most popular American automobile in terms of sales in 1985. So, Oldsmobile sales had been declining and experienced slump. In 1985, Olds sales were over 1 million cars. In 1985, 5 years later, in 1990, sales had slumped to 416,000 cars. That is a loss of 60% of your sales in 5 years. So Oldsmobile got ready to introduce this new car, and they were just bleeding red ink, and they were losing money like crazy. So when they introduced a brand new model, brand new style of the Olds 98 in 1991, and I have a picture of it right here. That's what the car looked like. Their solution to trying to bump sales was an integrated direct marketing program that included traditional advertising along with a direct marketing campaign. So they put this direct marketing campaign together, and here's how it worked. The campaign included a direct mailer that provided information on the new car and a number of new incentives, including a $50 savings bond to simply come in and test drive a 1991 Olds 98. And if you bought one, a $500 purchase rebate. So the plan was to mail out this offer. This offer was sent to 2.7 million previous Oldsmobile owners. Now, the benefit that Oldsmobile had was they knew who their previous owners was, and they had developed this database. So they didn't send this out to 2.7 million random people in the country. They sent this direct mail piece out to 2.7 million previous Oldsmobile owners. That meant that they had purchased something else, that they no longer were Oldsmobile owners, but they had been Oldsmobile owners. So sent this out to 2.7 million people, resulted in 178,000 test drives, and over the 3-month campaign, 11,000 cars in the $20,000 range were sold as a direct result of the program. So my question to you is, was it worth it for them to trap those names, and was the program a success? Well, to be able to figure this out, you need to understand how much the program cost and how much they made on the program. Now, all the information is here in front of you to be able to make those calculations. You might have to make one or two small assumptions, but you can make all of the calculations. And if you were an MBA student, this should be a no-brainer, easy to do calculation. And if you're an undergraduate student, with a little bit of thought, you ought to be able to come up with this information. So let me walk you through how this calculation would work. Okay, so let's talk about the cost of the mailer. We're going to send out 2.7 million mailers, and we're going to estimate that the cost is $5 a piece for the mailers. This is really a very glossy mailer. It was designed to be a really, sort of a high quality mailer, and a mailer that would catch the eye of anybody who got it, and they would open it and they would look at it. Okay, so they mailed out 2.7 million mailers at $5 a piece for a total of $13,500,000. How do you like that for a campaign? 2.7 million mailers at $5 a piece, $13,500,000. Yikes! Then, of those 2.7 million mailers, it resulted in 178,000 test drives. And to come in and do a test drive, you got a $50 savings bond. Now, some of you don't know how savings bonds work, but savings bonds have a value on them, but it's a future value based on you holding that savings bond for a number of years. So it turns out that a $50 savings bond costs the company who is buying them $25 a piece. So 178,000 test drives, $25 a piece. This results in another $4.45 million, or $4,450,000 in savings bonds for the people who took the test drives. Next, 11,000 cars were purchased. And for each of the 11,000 cars that were purchased, each of the people were given a $500 rebate, which results in another $5.5 million. So the total cost of the campaign was $23,450,000. So Oldsmobile had invested almost $24 million in this direct marketing campaign to previous Oldsmobile owners that no longer owned an Oldsmobile. The question then is, how likely is it that this was going to be successful? I don't know, $24 million? That seems like a lot of money. Especially because how many cars did they sell? They only sold 11,000 cars. So let's check out the calculation, right? Cost of the mailer, everything added together, total cost $23,450,000. But let's look at profits, all right? So there were 11,000 cars sold, and each of the cars sold for $20,000, and there's about a 25% profit margin on each of these cars, gross profit margin, or $44 million. So the net profit after we take out the marketing cost was $44 million minus $23,450,000, or a net of $20,550,000. So the marketing campaign, to some degree, obviously was successful because they ended up with $20 million. And it's hard to tell how many of those cars they might have sold to previous Oldsmobile owners, but they would have never sold 11,000 of those cars. And so in general, we would have to say what? The campaign appears to have been successful. It netted Oldsmobile over $20 million. That's the power of direct marketing. All right, so let's look at something else. So let's start. So how much is the value of an email address? All right, so let's start with an example from Jack's Oldsmobile. All right, so Jack has a list of old customers that he would like to recapture. He develops an offer to get them back, and he can use one of three medias to send them the offer. It includes direct mail, an email, and phone calls. Here's Jack's estimate of the response rates based on offers. Now, if you know very much about direct marketing, you know that phoning customers has the highest response rate. That's, by the way, why people call you every night at home and robo-call you, is because phone calls are the most have the highest response rate, followed by direct mail, which typically has a response rate of 2 to 3%, followed by email, which is probably around 3 times less than direct mail. And so the response rates for email are typically under 1%. Okay, so let's look at this. All right, so the direct mail, 5,000 names at mail materials at 33 cents and mailing expense 27 cents. So it cost us 60 cents a piece to mail something to these people. All right, so it's 60 cents times 5,000 people. That's $3,000. If the response rate of 1.5%, you get 75% responses with a gross profit of $50 from the promotion. That's $3,750 in revenue, $3,000 in contact expense. So the total profits were $750. So the value of each name then is 15 cents. Email, 5,000. Mailing expense, only 4 cents, and that's because you're going to use a professional emailing firm that makes sure that the data that the emails don't get trapped in the spam filters. And you can see we run through the same calculations here. Total contact cost $200. Response rate 0.5%. That's 25 responses. $50 profit from the promotion, total revenue $1,250. So the value of each name is 21 cents. So while you got a lot fewer responses than you did with direct mail, it turns out the value of each name was higher. Now with the phones, we get a 2.5% response rate, but the contact cost was $750. That is $1.50 per phone call for 5,000 people. 125 responses, total revenue $62.50, total cost $7,500. As a result, you lost $1,250 or 25 cents per name. So in this case, the offer that makes the most sense is email. But remember, the original purpose of the promotion is to do what? Let's look at the top here again. An offer to get back and recapture old customers. So which of these approaches gets the most old customers back? Well, it's the phone approach, right? You end up with 125. With email, you only end up with 25. So if you think about it from that perspective, the best method is then phones, although you've still lost money by doing that. You hope to be able to make that money up over time by getting these people to become, some of them to become loyal Oldsmobile service center users again. So what if the gross profit was $40 and instead of $50? Well, the answer is, well, at $40, then the only version of this that's profitable is email. So as the gross profit goes down, the cheapest way to actually make the contacts turns out to look like the best approach. But what if the gross profit was $100 instead of $40 or $50? Well, at $100, which is the best approach? Well, at $100 of gross profit, the best approach is the phone, followed by direct mail, followed by email. So the profit, when the profit is high enough, the order of the profitability for each of the methods is reversed. So what insight does this provide? Well, the insight it should provide to you is that you have to do the calculations to estimate which of the approaches is going to be the most profitable, and you need to go back and base your decision on actually running the numbers. So what are some of the benefits of email marketing? Well, it's far cheaper to send email messages. It's faster to send email messages. Since it's cheaper and faster, they can be used in ways that direct marketing and phones can't. And they can be used to increase relationships because they're easy to personalize. And they can be used to create viral marketing situations. However, understand that email messages are the least personal and result in the least amount of relationship building. So finally, let's look at the uses of different kinds of promotional messages using different mediums, okay? Regular promotions, you can use all three methods. A low-cost item, probably the best approach is going to be email. Last-minute specials, because of the speed, it's probably going to be email. Retention messages, well, you're probably not going to do it with phone, but some direct mail and, of course, email. Follow-up messages, could be all three. Viral marketing, it's an email-based strategy. And then newsletters, obviously, it's going to be direct mail and email. So depending on what kinds of communications you want to have, this gives you an idea of which sorts of communication mediums you might want to use.